Church, we're glad that you've joined us for this week's morning devotion, uh, midweek devotion. I guess it's still the morning too. This week's is entitled Zooming Out. The phrase is, when in doubt, zoom out. That's what I sort of talked about with the kids during this past Sunday's children's sermon. I talked about that when you have a bad day, or like when your older sister picks on you, or when your parents plan something for supper that's disgusting, as my daughter calls it. Zoom out. Zoom out to see how big those problems are, well, because they're usually small. While it might seem like doom and gloom, zooming out will put those things in perspective. And one way I told the kids to do that was to zoom out, is to literally go outside when the weather cooperates and look up at the night sky. Consider the stars and how big outer space is. Then ponder the one who created it all. Your problems might seem like a little small in comparison to the immensity that is God's grandeur. And I think this advice works for adults as well. At least God thought it did for the Israelites, because God spoke through Isaiah to God's people saying, look up at the sky and consider, who created these? The one who brings out their attendants one by one, summoning each of them by name. Because of God's strength and mighty power, not one is missing. Now, when God said this through Isaiah, the Israelites were deep in it. They were kicked out of their home. Everything they thought they knew was thrown into question. They were up in turmoil. It wasn't just that they were evicted. They felt like God had abandoned and forgotten them. They languished, suffered even for years in a foreign land. Their whole identity was up for grabs, because who would they be if God wasn't for them, if they weren't God's people anymore? And so God starts by reminding them of who God is, the one who made and named the stars, set them in place so not one was missing or forgotten. God had not forgotten about the Israelites. God was not powerless to help them in their predicament, as it later says. It is exactly the exhausted and weary God revives. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength, God later says. So our ability to zoom out isn't a sort of nihilism that our little problems don't matter in the grand scheme of things, or like we're just some infinitesimal speck of dirt in an otherwise careless universe. No, we zoom out because it allows us to take in the power of God, who cares for every last one of us. The God who made and named the stars loves and claims you as their own. Your problems, your struggles, your disappointments, your grief, your pain, your anger, your shattered dreams, your wrenched guts, your questions, your doubts, your predicaments, lay them at God's feet. Name them out loud. Shout them out to the night sky. God can take it. Set them there. And trust you will not be left alone in your weariness. Indeed, if God's throne is the cross, it's at such places where God is most readily available and willing to help. Thanks for joining me for this week's rather quick midweek devotion, but I hope you heard a word of grace. You're invited to join us for worship this Sunday morning. We gather at 10:30 online or in person, but if not, our benediction is the same as always.